All right, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. And we're going to typically, if you're not familiar with the format of these meetings, we typically have the first 10 minutes or so. I try and recap the news from the solar industry for this week. Then we also have, we do a update on events, things of that nature. I'll mention to folks who are online. We're joined here. If you guys could mute yourself if you're not talking, that'd be helpful. Otherwise, I'll keep looking over saying who's talking right now. But one of the things about this format is it allows us to then have interaction with a number of folks who are involved in the solar industry, either just interested or doing installations or whatever. But it's good for me to have that back and forth. So it's kind of a unique format. Then after we do the webinars, the upcoming events, then we do a little bit of a deep dive into a topic. Today's deep dive, we're going to talk about lithium-ion batteries and what are the issues around them, and are there alternatives on the horizon? It's kind of a mess, and I think we're going to see how that's going to sort itself out. So that said, let me jump into the news of the week for the week of let's see, what is it? August. Oh my gosh, I'm in the past. November 29th. All right, so in conjunction with Con Ed or Consolidated Edison, Sunrun, which is the nation's largest provider of installation and residential services in the solar industry, has just successfully activated the largest virtual power plant in the state of New York. This power plant consists of about 300 solar plus storage systems throughout the state. This demonstration project synchronizes the discharge of this collective body of stored energy back to the grid during periods of high load demand. Sunrun receives an upfront payment from Con Ed based on the capacity that they've got in that virtual utility, and then they in turn can offer discounted battery systems to the customers, and they can also offer some incentive money if these residential systems then sign up to participate in this 10-year program. So you're signing up for a 10-year commitment there. Participants then get the benefits of having storage on their system on their residence at a reduced price. But then they also get credits should Sunrun take some of that energy, pump it back onto the grid during peak load demand periods. According to data from Level 10 Energy, the price of solar and wind from under power purchase agreements has gone up once again. This is as of the third quarter of 2024, the average price for a power purchase agreement from solar is $56.58. The average price for wind is $65.63. That's per megawatt hour. If you translate that in your brain, it's going to be about 5.5 cents, a little bit more for per kilowatt hour wholesale. And this is about twice the amount that solar and wind cost from these large generating systems just 4 years ago. So the price has gone up pretty dramatically. Rising prices were attributed to the increased cost due to tariffs on solar panels. I think a bigger factor is the delays in interconnection. There's been about a 5-year backlog for a lot of these big systems to get online, as well as supply chain disruptions for key components such as breakers and switches. Now, if you're not familiar with power purchase agreements, they're the price that it costs corporations to buy the wholesale price of electricity from these large wind and solar installations. The demand for clean energy from corporations continues to rise. Level 10 cited that a lot of buyers are coming into the market to buy power for data centers, for AI, and that there's a lot of smaller corporations also joining in, looking to set and meet clean energy targets. For the 12th month in a row, solar has been the dominant energy, the new energy source. that's been attached to the grid. During the month of August, pretty dramatic. Solar energy generating sources accounted for 99.6% of all of the new energy added to the grid during that month. And for the first 8 months of this year, wind and solar, renewable energy, has accounted for about 90% of all of the new generating services added to the grid. The remainder of that, about 5%, came from the fact that they finally got a couple of nuclear generators online at a Georgia facility. These things have been in the works for a number of years and have been about 4, 5, 10 times the cost estimates. They're now on. That accounts for about 5% of the capacity that's been added to the grid this year. And then natural gas accounts for another 4% or so. The combined capacities of wind and solar, they've exceeded the expectations. That's what the graph is the projections for 2024. They've exceeded it. They now constitute about 21% of the nation's total installed utility scale generating capacity. Wind constitutes about 11.74%, solar about 9.21%, but about a third, or around 30% of all the solar installed is small scale rooftop systems, residential systems, commercial systems, and they are never reflected in FERC's data when you see these reports. So including the residential solar, the commercial solar into the mix, that would bring the share of wind and solar closer to about a quarter, 25% of all of the generating capacity on the grid. When you include hydro, which is at about 7 and some change percent, biomass a little over 1%, and geothermal, which is about 0.3%. Renewables now account for about 30% or so, a little bit more than 30% of the electric that's generated here in the US. Utility scale systems have always been subject, or not always, but in recent years have been subject to NERCs, and NERC is another body. It's the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. They have a standard called the Critical Infrastructure Protection Cybersecurity Requirements. And this standard, the utility scale systems have to adhere to protect these things from cybersecurity issues. And now UL 2941 is a standard that's in place for residential and commercial systems to deal with cybersecurity. These are supposed to be incorporated into every inverter that will prevent widespread internal software crashes from upgrades or hacks from outside entities. The standard lists 10 different domains or issues that need to be addressed in order for that inverter to be listed as UL 2941 compliant. These include access controls, cryptography, encryption within the inverter. So that's a new thing. So you're going to start seeing a lot of these inverters claiming to be compliant with this new standard 2941 around cybersecurity. A lot of that is, I should go back there. A lot of that is really, the residential market is pretty vulnerable to these attacks because as of last year, the top 5 inverters accounted for 96% of the market share. So if somebody hacks into, say, a solar edge system or an Enphase system, you're going to see a significant number, a significant portion of the installed base is going to be affected by that. So that's kind of like an apples and a Windows kind of thing, where because they're so dominant, that a hack within one is going to affect a large segment. The Pennsylvania Turnpike has announced that they're jumping into solar in a big way, looking to enhance sustainability, but also to provide electricity for their internal operations, as well as make some money selling solar back to the grid. What they've done is they've advertised for proposals from developers for 15 sites on land that the Turnpike owns that they're not currently using. All but one of these are in Western Pennsylvania. The plan is for the Turnpike to buy the electricity that's generated as a power purchase agreement from these for the next 20 years. And then at the end of that 20 years, they're going to make the decision of whether they upgrade them and continue to buy the electricity, or the sites are restored back to their original condition. And that is the news from the solar industry for this week. Does anyone have any comments or anything that they want to add that's run across your desk here? I'll give you guys just a moment to make that statement. I've muted most of you guys, I think, but so you can unmute and jump in if you've got something. All right. Hearing nothing, I'm going to go ahead and just make some of the announcements here of what's happening over the next couple of weeks or months. Today, you just missed it. It was happening at noon, so you're not allowed to switch channels and go over, but they're looking at optimizing storage systems. Later this afternoon, Solar United Neighbors is going to have a question and answer for solar homeowners at 3 p.m. October 30th at noon, maximizing the IRR benefits. That's from Wood McKinsey. October 30th at 2 from Solar Builder. They're looking at cable management issues with solar. And October 30th, there's the DC Clean Energy Summit. So that's taking place. I think it's both in person and virtual. You can attend it online as well. October 31st, 12:30 p.m., grid demand issues. So this is one of those, we've had these discussions where is the grid ready for this demand that's about to hit it? November 6th at 2 p.m., distributed versus centralized inverter systems. So oftentimes with these larger commercial systems, you're kind of given a choice. You can have like one big inverter, or you can have smaller systems, just a lot of them linked together, and there's advantages or disadvantages of each of those. November 6th at 2 p.m., fleet electrification. We're going to see a lot more of this with companies like UPS, for example, or Amazon that have a large fleet of delivery trucks, maybe switching over to electric vehicles for economic and environmental reasons. November 6th and 7th, the New York Solar Summit, if you're in that part of the world in Albany. November 7th at 2 p.m., data efficiency in solar. And November 19th at 2 p.m., maximizing, they always like to refer DERs, that's distributed energy resource, getting the most for your buck out of these distributed systems. That's for larger companies. And then November 21st, 2 p.m., talking about pile design for utility solar. So how would you set up the support poles? We're starting to really get down into the weeds there. And just to remind everybody, we do have online and in-person classes from solarpvtraining.com. So jump on in there if you're so inclined. And we have the 9th edition of Understanding Photovoltaics out there and available to everybody. And that is what's happening in the world of solar. Now I'll let anybody have anything they want to add to the mix here before I continue to ramble on. Give you just a second. All right. Feel free to jump in too if you've got something you want to. I may not be able to see if you just put the hand up emoji or whatever. So just jump in and interrupt me as we're moving forward. Should something occur to you, or if you have a question or further explanation, or it doesn't make sense to you. So again, this is designed to be a bit of an interactive. If you start asking questions I don't know the answer, I'll just say, stop bothering me and we'll move on. Okay, so this is the item that I was going to focus on here as I was doing some research. There's a lot of stuff out there about lithium. We're in the middle of this transition. For so many years when we were teaching solar, all of the discussion about battery bank sizing and integrating these systems into our solar always was focused on lead acid battery. And now we're into the wonderful world of lithium. Well, it's not without its problems as well. So I wanted to hit on some of those. And I'm kind of, as I was putting this thing together, the more I looked at it, I kept falling back and forth in my own mind, and maybe some of you guys will have perspectives on this. Is is lithium with us for the long term? You know, we've always talked about lithium batteries as being a bridge technology that was going to take us from lead acid to something else. Well, is that bridge going to be extended for a period of time? Or is it going to be shorter than we may think? And I was kind of back and forth on this. And hopefully as I tell you some of the things I've researched, you'll have some perspectives, maybe see why the hesitation. Lithium battery has been growing at a pretty robust rate. You can see there almost a 21% per year annualized growth rate or year on year growth rate. We're still in the early days here of the lithium marketplace. We see lithium being integrated more and more into solar systems, which is what we're focused on. But really, where lithium in the past was focused on was laptops, cell phones, electronic devices, a few fixed storage devices within solar, for example. But now, of course, electric vehicles. Electric vehicles is the 900-pound gorilla in the battery world. And that's where people are really focused on how this market is going to continue to develop, continue to grow. But I did want to isolate out just the solar battery or the fixed battery or the ESS, the energy storage systems that we focus on. And you'll see that even the projections there between now and 2030 are showing about a 15% growth year on year. And we've talked about some of that in the past where currently today, almost 50% of the residential systems that are being installed are beginning to incorporate batteries. Now, some of that is skewed a little bit because California is in such a place where 70% of those installed in California are putting in batteries. And that's largely because utilities are messing with net metering process where it used to be it was they pay you retail, you buy from them retail. So the meter runs forward, the meter runs backwards. Well, now most utilities are moving towards a we'll pay you wholesale, you pay us retail kind of price model, which significantly reduces the incentive to send power back to the grid. So that said, if you're getting paid 6 cents a kilowatt hour when you send it to the grid and being charged 20 cents, the incentive is to keep that power. Why sell it wholesale and then buy it retail? So batteries are one way to do that. A second mechanism that's pushing people towards battery is time of day pricing. So when a utility institutes time of day pricing and they say, okay, during periods of peak demand, we're going to charge you, say, 40 cents a kilowatt hour. During periods of low demand, we're going to charge you, 6 cents a kilowatt hour in those extremes. Well, then what you do is you use your battery to serve you the electricity you need during periods of peak demand. So why am I paying 40 cents a kilowatt hour to run things? I would rather store the power I've got and use it. Even if I don't have enough of a solar array to recharge my battery that quickly, or even if I don't have an array at all, I could incorporate batteries into my home and then I could charge them at night when power is like 6 cents a kilowatt hour. And I could discharge them in the early evening when power costs me 40 cents. And it begins to make economic sense just simply to incorporate batteries. That's considered, self-consumption. That's another way. So that's reducing your price. So if you can consume as much as you can of your own energy, that would be self-consumption. That's like not sending it back to the grid at wholesale. And then this load leveling or essentially maximizing your economic benefits, that's going to be because of time of day price. Then the third primary motivation as to why people are putting batteries is the grid is getting unreliable. It's always been a bit unreliable. It just gets worse all the time. So if the grid's going to keep going down, I better have batteries here to get me through that. And some of that is the grid's fault for not maintaining itself, and other is the weather is getting more extreme. We're seeing these hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, wildfires. All of these things are contributing to some long-term outages. So people are saying, okay, well, I'm going to prepare for myself there, and I'm going to put in batteries. So this is one reason we're focused on the batteries. So why why was there a shift, for example, from lead acid to lithium? Well, lithium has some specific really good advantages there. One is energy density, and that's one of the reasons why we use lithium ion batteries in automobiles, in EVs, or in laptops, or in cell phones, is you get more power for the weight and size of the battery. So that's called energy density, more bang for your buck for the physical size of this thing. Lithium ion batteries have a longer lifespan. Typically, when they were first introduced, we look at lead acid batteries, and they typically have about a 5-year lifespan. So every 5 years, you got to replace these things. Well, when Tesla came out with the Powerwall, they guaranteed it, they warranted it for 10 years. That was quite dramatic. Here it is. Oh, you know what? I don't have to replace this for 10 years. That's great. Then charging speed, that was a thing. We could charge these things faster. We could use more of it, depth of discharge. So with lead acid batteries, we typically have to only use half of the capacity. Well, with lithium ion, we can use like 90%. And then we are adopting lithium ion batteries as the cost of these lithium batteries become more the cost becomes more reasonable, right? So where are these batteries being installed? Well, 6% industrial, 40% residential. As I mentioned, there's a big add-on, but then the big share is in commercial. So a lot of these commercial businesses are adding in batteries. So that's just where they're going in. But one thing that surprised me when I was researching this, because as I've been developing these textbooks and the like, I've kind of been tempted to say, what's the point of even talking about lead acid batteries anymore? Everybody's shifting over to lithium ion batteries. Is this a bit like talking about VHS tapes or CD-ROMs? Has the technology passed it by? But actually, as of 2023, still about 65% of all of the systems installed are lead acid. And of those, 42% are still just 12-volt batteries. So this old technology that if you're like a Mother Earth news reader, back, a prepper or whatever, putting your systems together, some of the folks on this call who have systems installed in their homes with battery backup may be sitting there with 12-volt lead acid batteries that are serving as battery backup, and they're working just fine. So it's still a major portion. There was some speculation in some of the articles that 2024 might be that time where the crossover, where it's 50-50. Couldn't find anybody to commit to that. But the projections are that by 2030, about 75% of all of the systems that are installed, the solar PV and battery storage, are going to be lithium. So we're still, like so many things in our lives today, we're in this transition period where we're going to we're switching from something that's been around for a good long while to something new. So the question that arises in my mind is how long are lithium ion batteries going to be the dominant player? There are certainly alternatives there. And before we started recording here, someone had asked about nickel iron. I think that was it, the Edison batteries, and whether that's a good alternative. There are some saltwater batteries out there. But the two that really kept coming up, at a utility scale, flow batteries, a good option, but not really. Flow batteries aren't really a good option at the residential scale. Sodium batteries are the ones that come up the most when you're reading the literature right now. And then solid state batteries are another one that come up. Not so much as sodium. So sodium, to me, and I was kind of getting convinced the more I read about this, that sodium might be a big deal. In fact, they're starting to build. I've got that little diagram there, or that illustration underneath. that they're building sodium gigafactories to make cells. These things, they say, have a lifespan 50,000 cycles that that can charge in 10 minutes. So this is the promise of sodium at the moment, that it's more abundant. It's significantly more abundant than lithium. Sodium, just salt. It's cheaper. It has a longer life. It can charge much, much faster. Imagine, an electric vehicle that has a sodium battery rather than a lithium-ion battery, and it can go from empty to full in 10 or 15 minutes of charging. That gets rid of that particular issue. The other thing, which we'll get into a little bit, is thermal runaway. The fact that lithium-ion batteries can catch fire. That's not the case with sodium batteries. So if I were putting money on the next big alternative, I think sodium would be high on my list. So what are some of the issues around historically with lithium? When we teach the class, we'll talk about what are the limitations? What is the downside of lithium? It certainly has big upsides. It's higher energy density. They last longer, bigger depth of discharge. Now they're actually less expensive because the prices come down, but they are hard to recycle. This traditionally, lead acid batteries, we see a 90-95% recycling rate. The rate that's often quoted in the lithium-ion battery world is 5%. Only 5% are recycled. This is going to cause a problem, and that's just sort of been a truism out there. They do have a limited life, 10 years. 10 years was great, but 10 years is 10 years, and it still has to be replaced. There are a lot of issues in the mining of lithium. We've seen some tremendous environmental damage in some of these locations, especially in desert regions, where they pump a lot of water down into the ground. They raise this lithium up in the form of a brine. They let it evaporate in pools. It causes huge environmental devastation. It uses a lot of water resources. It destroys some of the land. The greatest known reserves of lithium are in 3 countries, essentially: Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. The greatest amount of mining of lithium is currently taking place in Australia, followed by China, followed by it's either Chile or Argentina. I think it's Argentina. So there are mining problems. Thermal runaway is an issue. We hear a lot about this, where the battery, if it's damaged, you can see it basically catches fire. So there's been a lot of codes that have been instituted to address this when we add lithium-ion batteries into our homes. They're still relatively expensive, and the supply of lithium is limited. It's not as abundant or easy to get to as you would like to see it. So then I wanted to address
Jay,
Yeah, go ahead.
excuse me. It's Bruce Huber. Hey, what about, the recycling taking it's no longer the battery's no longer feasible to run my Tesla. Can I transition that to my home? Is any is that a recycling?
Yeah. And in fact, that's something that in here in this slide, I'm just saying that there have been some recent studies, and they're basically saying, okay, yeah, recycling is an issue, but it turns out we're not really at a 5% recycling. We're closer to about 50% even right now, and it's getting cheaper and easier. And one of the major things that you're talking about is repurposing those batteries, because EV batteries, it may no longer be functional for a car where now your range has been reduced from, let's say, 300 miles to 100 miles. Well, that may not be acceptable for your EV, but you could take that battery and now use it as battery backup, and it still has a functionality. It has a functionality in some way or form. So that's one way of recycling it, but also just the process of recycling is getting better and better and more accessible. And there's sort of two places where recycling comes to play. One is end of life. This battery's worn out, we need to recycle it. We haven't really gotten there yet. This diagram here is showing that that's going to be a thing 2035, 2040. But there's also a lot of production scrap, whether batteries get damaged in shipping or whatever. And that's the issue we're dealing with right now, but it's a relatively minor issue. So I read articles about recycling centers coming up all the time, and the techniques are getting better and the like. So I think that recycling is kind of overblown. I would say that's an issue, but not a big as issue as we like to say. The other thing about life is there's been a lot of this talk about, they're talking about million-mile batteries. EV batteries that can last a long, long time on a lot of cycles. 15 years is now becoming the norm. A million miles is a possibility with your automobiles. So perhaps the lifespan issue is, again, also being addressed incrementally as the lithium marketplace matures. The mining problems, well, these mining problems are real. But recently, there's been this discovery of a huge amount of lithium in the Salton Sea, which is in Southern California. It's kind of an area that's a bit of a devastated region. Apparently, there was a great inland lake, but then the water patterns were shifted and that lake dried up and became kind of a smelly place. But there's a lot of geothermal activity there as well. And a number of geothermal power plants have been built within this region, many of them owned by Warren Buffett. Anyway, they're already active and they're providing power to some of the Southern California municipalities. Well, they recently discovered that water that they're pumping up out of the ground, this heated water that's part of the geothermal activity, is absolutely laced with lithium. So they're beginning to harvest that lithium from this water that's being pumped up to run this brine that's being used to run these geothermal plants. And this extraction technique, which they estimate could meet 40% of the world's demand in lithium, it's like the Saudi Arabia of lithium for this discovery, is kind of a non-invasive extraction technique because they're already doing it. They pump the water out, they harvest the heat, and then they pump it back in to these geothermal locations. Well, all they're doing is adding one more step to that. They're harvesting the lithium from that brine before they pump it back down into the ground. So I don't want to say that it's environmentally pure, but it's certainly less devastating than what we've seen. And because it is such a big discovery, we may find that's going to address some of those environmental issues when it comes to lithium mining. So I'll give you guys, I know we've had a couple of comments here. Anybody have any comments so far before I jump in to, because I think a lot of folks, there's just people mentioning other locations that are mining lithium. One of the things that we're seeing is that a lot of people aren't aware of. There are a lot of different sort of flavors of lithium-ion batteries. We sort of class them all as one, but there are different types. I just thought I'd highlight those there because there's lithium iron phosphate, usually LFP. These are longer life, good depth of discharge. The end phase batteries are LFP. They're touted as being safer. They're touted as not being as susceptible to thermal runaway. I think Tesla has used traditionally lithium nickel cobalt aluminum oxide, or NCA. Those things have very good energy density. a good long life, but they are susceptible to thermal runaway. So that, because they've been so dominant in the marketplace with EVs, that's, I think, where people get this notion that these things are very susceptible to thermal runaway. Then you get some of these others like lithium cobalt oxide, which are used in cameras, phones, laptops, smaller things. We don't see them in EVs as much. You see that whole list there. Well, I can show you. I pulled this thing up. It's a little bit more of a shorthand, but you can just see the major types there. There's LMOs, which are used in some EVs and power tools. The lithium iron phosphates, we see that quite a lot. They're used in EVs, power tools. The ones I mentioned about the nickel aluminum, that's are the Tesla ones. So there's bunches of different flavors, and some people will tout theirs as being better than others. So it's kind of whatever, take that as marketing to a certain extent, but just be aware there are different types. We're going to continue to see lithium-ion battery prices fall. If you look at this chart one way, these are the retail prices. So really this year, we're seeing lithium-ion batteries break the $100 a kilowatt hour price tag there. So if you've got a 10 kW, we should see those coming down and coming down pretty significantly. I think a lot of the cost of these things is because of lack of supply. There really should be no reason for a Tesla Powerwall or an LG Chem battery that's around 10 kW. The wholesale cost there is going to be somewhere around $1,000. Why are they selling them for $10,000? We should see this competition. Unfortunately, China has been the one that's really been pushing the edge, but we've seen now 100% tariff on Chinese batteries coming in, and that's gonna impact the U.S. market quite a bit. But the rest of the world's going to be getting cheap batteries. They're going to get cheap batteries from China. The U.S. is going to pay a premium, largely because of our trade policy that is trying to encourage domestic production of these. But I guess I would tend to fall on the side of the same way I feel about solar panels, that protectionist policies to try and develop a silicon solar industry is kind of investing in a technology that's perhaps on its way out. So same with perhaps lithium batteries. We do have a more robust battery manufacturing industry here in the United States, but it really is just centered in Tesla. So I don't feel a need to protect his business. I would really be happy for China to subsidize the cheap use of batteries and the cheap use of solar panels as we develop the next generation so that we can compete them at the next level, where perhaps the U.S. invests in sodium battery technology, the U.S. invests in perovskite technology for solar, and we find we become the dominant player in the third generation batteries, and not use protectionist policies to try and hold on to a technology that will eventually, whether it's 5 years from now or 10 years from now, fade away due to competition from better technologies. So that's my libertarian perspective on that. So we see that. All right. So is sodium the disruptor? And I'm kind of beginning to believe it will be. When I started this, I wasn't convinced, but it is so much more abundant. And even right now, the price of sodium and the price of lithium batteries are fairly competitive. Normally with these new technologies, one is so much cheaper than the other. So, but right now they're fairly competitive, and they feel that within just 2 or 3 years, sodium will actually be cheaper than lithium. The big advantage, of course, with sodium is non-flammable, no thermal runaway. Now, this is going to have a big impact in solar installation. If the thermal runaway issue goes away, let's say the solar industry adopts sodium batteries, We're going to talk here in a second about some of the standards that have developed around this. I suspect that's going to be slow to catch up. Of course, we're going to be in a transition from lithium to sodium, so there's still going to be a lot of lithium batteries out there, but standards tend to lag slowly behind technology. They do have 3 times the lifespan. So if a lithium ion battery is going to last 10 years, sodium battery very likely could last 30 years. That's pretty exciting. And the charge time, 15 minutes, man. Full to empty for your EV in 15 minutes. That's pretty dramatic. But the downside is they are less energy dense. So you'll find that the cars, EVs, will be heavier. For our purposes in solar, that's not a big deal. If the battery weighs 350 pounds versus 270 pounds, nobody's going to really care. They're going to be on floor pedestals anyway. So sodium, I think, for our industry specifically, may become a big disruptor. Are some of the safety concerns for lithium-ion batteries overblown? There's an indication that perhaps they are. The Electric Power Research Institute found that lithium energy storage system fires declined 97% during the years between 2018 and 2023. So yeah, it was an issue, but a lot of the standards that are out there are working. So that's a big deal. Yeah, Pete, you have a question?
Yeah, is that decline in fires of 97%? Is that like a per capita decline or is that total? Because remember, the usage is going way up during those
Yeah.
same 2018 to 2023 years.
Yeah, I think it's installed, per installed. So when I looked at the original diagram, it was sort of like the numbers of fires are holding fairly constant, but
Oh,
because the installed base is just skyrocketing, it really represents a 97% per install decline in these fires.
okay.
And significantly, the National Transportation Safety Board found electric vehicles are 11 times less likely to catch on fire than gas vehicles. So when people tell you that EVs are unsafe because they can catch on fires, just remember that you've got a tank of gas there in your internal combustion engine, and it's, according to the federal government, 11 times more likely to catch on fire than that thermal runaway issue. So I think that may be overblown. All right, so then as a result, and I think this standard here, which was instituted in 2018, so that gets to Pete's comment directly. Notice that decline was between 2018 and 2023, 5-year period. Well, in 2018, the International Fire Code basically said if you're going to be installing these batteries, they need to meet the UL 9540 or 9540 energy storage requirements. And this is something the manufacturers have to meet. So there are a number of safety guidelines. And if you want to list your product as UL 9540 compliant, then you will have had to have met these certain design criteria. It might well be that these things worked, that the new products coming out, because the standards had been set, are much safer. I would say that there's some indirect evidence to that just because of the timing and the like. So that's one of those examples where codes do in fact, or standards do work. Now, what we did is we got into some additional standards, and this is the one, and we have touched on this in the past during some past meetings, the NFPA 855. And this is about where and how you install these systems. So let's make the distinction. The previous standard I mentioned was how manufacturers make the product safer. This is one that affects us as solar installers. How do you install these systems in the home? So NFPA 855 says that first off, the energy storage system must be UL 9540 listed, right? So that's fine. There must be a minimum of 3 feet between each unit. unless the product has been given an exemption through that 9540 standard. So basically, they want to make sure if one of them catches fire, it's not going to cause the other one to catch fire. That's kind of what the purpose of that separation is. The ES location are detailed very specifically, and this is where it gets into where you can put them in garages, you can put them in accessory structures or separated buildings, you can put them outside, you can put some in dedicated closets. This applies more so to commercial buildings where you have a facility designed to deal with energy storage. So there's very specific requirements like 2-hour fire rated walls, I think, something like that, sprinkler systems, drains, all of this stuff where in your residence, you probably don't have a facility like that. So more than likely, you're going to stick it in the closet, you're going to put it in an outbuilding, or you're going to stick it outside. Those that are installed outdoors cannot be within 3 feet of doors or windows. They say that ES units, just says note, may not be installed in living areas or bedrooms. So as I mentioned, essentially you can't put them inside anymore. That was the big thing. Well, NFPA 855 was not really enforced until the 2023 code, which incorporated it. So we're beginning now to see 2023, 2024, municipalities are beginning to enforce this standard. They're also saying that the maximum rating is 20 kilowatt hours within your building, 80 kilowatt hours if it's outside. Well, for most residences, that's not a big deal. So then it even has some other ones like fire detection, including smoke, heat, alarms, vehicle impact protection, approved barriers, ventilations, and the like. I ran into a guy who was telling me that the local code officer did require that they put in some of those concrete vehicle barriers in the garage to prevent a vehicle from being able to hit the battery system that was mounted on the wall. That adds a certain amount of cost. And the thing that I find, which is funny, and I don't quite see how they would ever enforce this, is they say that if you're using an electric vehicle as a temporary power, so think about your Ford Lightning, the F-150. It could run a home for 7 days with the bidirectional charger. It says that vehicle, you can't do that for more than 30 days. Well, they're kind of not clear. Is that 30 days in a row? So if you move the vehicle out of the garage and then come back, you start all over again. It's 30 days over the course of a year. It feels like a weird thing. The other thing that feels weird about this is all of these requirements apply to fixed energy systems. They do not apply to electric vehicles. So you're not allowed to put more than 40 kilowatt hour battery in your garage, and you got to have barriers and you got to have all these protections and setbacks and all of that. But you can park your Ford F-150 that's got 100 kilowatt hour battery in it, no problem. So the standard, I think, needs some thinking. And then once we get into the world of sodium batteries, is all of this going to change? Are we going to start to see that this thermal runaway issue is no longer an issue, which was the cause of all of these regulations? But are the regulations going to stay in place just because of inertia? It's that often happens. And I would hate to see that happen where we've got a technology that's perfectly safe. You could stick it right in your bedroom if you want to, if that's where you wanted to install your battery, but you're not allowed to because this old technology might have had some problems. So. All right. So that is my brief look at lithium ion. I guess to sum it up, I would say that I think they've overstepped the bounds. When they get to 855, I think they're putting restrictions in place that are perhaps over aggressive and add a lot of costs to the installation of these systems. And I'm beginning to get convinced that sodium may become a technology in the not too distant future that we're dealing with in the replacement of lithium ion batteries, similar to how I've come to believe that perovskite as a technology within solar panels will at some point, and in the not too distant future, become a big player and begin and eventually supersede silicon as the source. So anybody
Jake.
have any comments?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, Joshua.
Yeah. So just quickly, two quick questions. On the previous topic discussed, can battery storage system be charged both by the PV system and the grid, not simultaneously, but in cases where we want to do peak shaving or load shifting, where let's say you have poor weather conditions, would it be possible to utilize the grid so that we can optimize the energy costs when the prices are higher? And the second question, just very quickly, is there a specific reason why industrial facilities use batteries less frequently than commercial facilities? Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll address the second one first because I can remember it. I'll get to the other. But my guess is these big industrial systems already, if they had a need for power, they had generators already in place. Diesel generators, natural gas generators, whatever. So that would kind of be my guess. A lot of those industrial are already using natural gas and pretty heavily for some of their industrial products. So they might just have natural gas generators on site. So that would be that, but it's purely a guess. Then the other one was you were asking if you can use the grid and
Yeah.
your array as a way of charging your batteries. Is that what you're
Yes.
saying? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you can set them up that way, for sure. And most people, I don't think they typically would set it up to use the grid as a charger of their batteries. They would do it where the way it typically will work is you've got a solar array that's generating power during the middle of the day when it's generating its most power. You generally don't have that big of a load unless it's a hot afternoon where the air conditioning is running. So that's the period of time you'd be feeding back to the grid, but you then take that power and use it to charge your batteries. So electricity always wants to go to the nearest load. Your loads are going to be near. Your battery is a load when it's not fully charged, so it's going to go there automatically. And then any excess is going to go to the grid. Then in today's market, if you've got time of day pricing, as soon as the sun sets, so in the early evening, that's when prices are at their highest. That's when load demand today in today's market is going to be at its highest because the solar resources are no longer generating, but people are coming home from work, they're making dinner, they're watching television, they're still awake. So that load is going to be at its highest. And then as everybody goes to bed, it falls off. So did that sort of answer your question, or were you getting at something
Yes.
deeper?
No, that answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah, and a lot of times the programming for this are fairly straightforward, because it can get complicated, and we are not always good at complications, especially folks who are going in. So Enphase, for example, they have like 3 settings. Do you want to set it for emergency backup? Do you want to set it for maximizing the income of the power that you're using? Or do you want to set it for self-consumption so that you're not sending power back? So essentially, are you dealing with time of day pricing? Are you dealing with a utility that's not paying you enough for the power you're getting back? Or did you install it primarily as a backup in case the grid goes down? And the profiles are going to be somewhat different, but you just choose one of those 3 profiles. And then it sets everything based on that. Someone in the comments just mentioned they had heard Enphase monitors the weather. And a lot of these companies are now doing that, where Enphase, for example, and I think SolarEdge does the same thing. They'll say, okay, we're going to monitor the weather. And if there is a weather emergency that's coming up or has been issued, we will make sure that your batteries are fully charged. So they'll change the profile. If you had it where you were wanting to maximize your economics, And that would have had you draining down your batteries. Because of an upcoming weather event, the system will override that and say, you're probably going to need this power for emergency backup. So we're going to take 100% of this power and charge your batteries and get it done right now. So these things are getting pretty smart. Any other questions? All right.
Jay,
Yeah.
sorry, Jay.
Yeah, Wade.
This is not really a question. I just want to thank you for the research that you did on the batteries. I mean, this is one of the more, I think, compelling research that I've heard on the batteries, and I want to thank you for the work that you've just done. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. And thank you for joining us from Jamaica. That's always good, right? You're down in Jamaica right now?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Terrific. Thanks. All right. Any other questions before we call it a day? All right. Hearing none, I appreciate your attention, and just will note that I won't be holding this session next week, but we'll be back in 2 weeks, and I'm going to be teaching a class. So thanks for your attention, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.